You may have seen this video by Katie Morton titled I Have a Crush on My Therapist. Or read this article by Dr. Ryan House titled A Client's Guide to Transference, where they talk about how it's good to talk to your therapist about romantic transference. If you don't know what this means, romantic transference is where you feel romantic feelings towards your therapist. This is usually due to some unresolved, underlying needs that haven't been met elsewhere in the client's life. What they don't tell you is how this is actually a very bad idea, and many therapists will straight up abandon their clients over this, in their alleged safe, non-judgmental space. Just go through the comment section of Katie Morton's video and see how many people had this exact thing happen to them after doing this. Look at the people who attempted suicide. Think about how many people went through with committing suicide but are unable to tell their story here because they are dead. Did Katie Morton ever tell you about this very serious risk? Did Dr. House ever tell you about how so many therapists will straight up abandon their clients over this, which often results in their death? Think about how many people are now dead because they naively follow the expert's advice. If you really do feel like it would be helpful to discuss romantic transference with a therapist, you should only talk about it with a different therapist, i.e. a therapist that you don't have romantic transference with, and never bring it up with the therapist you are attracted to. You don't even have to stop seeing the therapist that you are attracted to, you could simply alternate therapists every other session or so. You don't even have to tell the first therapist that you are alternating therapists. Did Katie Morton or Dr. House ever make this suggestion? Did they ever tell you of the risk, and propose a very simple solution to drastically mitigate this risk? No, they did not. And it literally cost many people their lives. Wouldn't it have been nice if we knew that a large proportion of the mental health profession thinks that a client talking about romantic transference will then effectively give the therapist a free pass to abandon their clients at will, without just cause? I have literally had an extremely traumatizing experience where I followed Dr. Howe's advice to the letter. In his article titled A Client's Guide to Transference, he suggests that you can take a break from the first therapist to work out the transference thing with another therapist, and return to the first therapist when you feel that you have resolved it, but bear in mind that he didn't say never talk about it with a therapist that you are attracted to. Like I'm saying, he still encouraged readers to talk to their therapists about romantic transference they have with them. I literally did exactly that, except the only problem was that when I tried to return to the first therapist who I had transference with, we'll call her Dr. Cuntley, after I had realized the true source of my transference, she decided that she wasn't comfortable treating me and refused to see me. Even though I didn't actually do anything wrong, and this hypocritical cunt monkey would beforehand constantly try to convince me to second guess the red flags I would see in others who actually did do something wrong. I'll probably make some more content later on describing the red flags I saw with Dr. Cuntley beforehand that I should have taken more seriously. This experience was literally so devastating and traumatizing that when I reported her to her manager, I got a refund. And what's worse is the fact that the second therapist, who we'll call Dr. Vampire, gaslit me, and was trying to tell me that it was perfectly ethical what Dr. Cuntley was doing, despite the fact that the article written by a clinical psychologist by the name of Dr. Ryan House, PhD, ABPP, quite literally said that I can take a break from the first therapist, work out the transference with the second therapist, and return to the first therapist when I feel like I've had it resolved. Not to mention that their boss ended up giving me a refund. And roughly half of the people in this profession that I've interacted with will justify Dr. Cuntley's actions, while the other half will say that she was wrong and I deserved my refund. The crazy thing was that I was the one who figured out the root cause of my transference on my own. Neither Dr. Cuntley nor Dr. Vampire helped me come to the realization. And what was the realization, you ask? Great question. I'd love to explain it in another video later on. Again, wouldn't it be nice if Dr. House mentioned that the take a break and then return to the first therapist later approach doesn't always work, and that apparently half of the profession will think that it's unethical to do this? I sure would have appreciated knowing that there is such a divide within this profession on this very serious issue. Katie Morton never mentioned this divide within the profession either. She never said that many therapists will see a client bringing up transference as essentially being a free pass to abandon their client on a whim's notice, as we've seen from so many tragic horror stories left in the comments of her own video. You know, I actually talked with Dr. House over the phone and told him about my experience, and he told me that after he had written that article, he learned that many schools of therapy will actually teach their therapists that they should abandon their clients if their clients have romantic transference. These certain schools apparently claim that it's unethical for a therapist to treat a client who's attracted to them for some reason. To give Dr. House credit where credit is due, he actually did tell me that he was going to make an update article taking this into consideration, where he'll point potential clients in the right direction as to make sure that they only talk about transference with a practitioner who's trained in a certain school which won't abandon them. I think that psychodynamic was one of the schools if I remember correctly, but don't quote me on that. The same cannot be said of Katie Morton, however. Despite all of these comments telling her this exact thing, I am not aware of her making any sort of revisions to the problematic content that she has produced, even though it's literally costing people their lives. What's really surprising is the fact that the licensing boards haven't picked up on this yet. Why do they allow these different schools of therapy to teach completely different things about the ethical codes? Why do they let one school teach that there's nothing wrong with a client experiencing romantic transference, while the other school teaches that it's very wrong for a client to experience romantic transference, and that therapists need to abandon their client in that scenario? The more and more time and experience I get in this world, the more and more horrified and astonished I become. I literally did not think that something like that was seriously going to happen beforehand. And plus, look at how poor the critical thinking skills are of those who blindly follow this abandoned clients who have romantic transference dogma. Why would it be unethical to treat a client that's attracted to you? I mean, I could see how it might feel a bit awkward and overwhelming for the client, and they might want to switch, but it really just depends on a case-by-case basis. Don't you think that maybe some clients feel like their attraction is not an issue? And either way, would it really make sense for a therapist to be allowed to just abandon their client over romantic transference alone? I certainly don't think so. Do you? Probably not. Think about it, what is actually so bad about having a crush on somebody? I can think of multiple examples where I had a crush on a coworker that I worked with, and it didn't really seem to be a problem. If anything, it seemed to help because I enjoyed coming into work more. Again, whether or not romantic transference is an issue really depends on an individual case-by-case basis. It is certainly not something that would necessarily be a problem to begin with. And shame on anybody who is still going to support the unjustifiable at this point. Have you seen a history textbook? It's a straight-up horror story full of all sorts of atrocities and injustices that were supported by the laws at the time. Do I even need to go down the list? Slavery? Racism? Women not even being allowed to vote? I'm sure that there were plenty of simps who chose to justify all of these atrocities with all sorts of insane and nonsensical mental gymnastics. I'm sure some people said something along the lines of it's okay for a white store owner to not serve a black customer. They have the right to set that boundary. It's the law. Racial desegregation is illegal. I know that's not what you want to hear, but that's what you need to hear. Like I said before, overall, it is best to just never even bring up romantic transference with a therapist you are attracted to. Either don't say anything about it at all, or exclusively talk to a different therapist that you aren't attracted to about it. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if they are from that same school as Dr. House and Katie Morton's, and they were taught to not abandon clients over romantic transference? Wouldn't it be safe to talk to someone like that about romantic transference you have with them? Well, here's the thing, even if they do say that they won't abandon you over romantic transference, couldn't they still lie and abandon you anyways without any negative repercussions? Wouldn't it be a way better idea to just avoid taking that risk altogether? I mean, I can't stop you from taking the risk and talking to your therapist about your crush on them if you're just hell-bent on doing it. All I can do is just beg and plead that you reconsider, and don't go through with it. You may think that talking to your therapist about romantic transference you have with them is a brave, good idea. That is certainly what we are led on to believe, but so many of these poor people who do exactly that, without knowing the full risk of doing so, end up feeling naive and foolish after they are stabbed in the back, and they feel like their courage is really just stupidity. But this is all just an illusion. They are not the stupid ones, the professionals in question who betray their clients are.